Going to do a quick video on how to replace the coolant bypass hose on a Toyota 2.7 without removing the intake manifold. Everybody says the manifold has to come off. It can't stay in place, but it doesn't have to be completely removed, which does save a fair bit of work. So I've already done this one. I started assembling it before thinking to shoot a video, but going to show you the highlights here. It should be pretty explanatory. Start by taking off the intake hose from the air filter to this resonator box. Take off this little vacuum hose here, this connector here at the back. There's a bolt here, another bolt here. Loosen the clamp connecting to the throttle body and just pivot it up out of the way. It'll stand there and stay. There's two 10mm bolts here and here, two 10mm nuts here and back here. Take those off, disconnect the big connector here from your throttle body, and just lay that out of the way. Up here you'll disconnect right here. This is for the I think it's the variable cam thing, I'm not sure, but it's got this big connector here. Just unplug it, pull it out of the way. Take this bolt off right here. Maybe not necessary, but I think it is because all these wires are here, they'll be in the way. Pull this connector up. There's a little tab here that lets you slide it up and off. Pull that off. Disconnect this connector here, and then you take off the manifold bolt. Take off the transmission dipstick tube. If it's an automatic, there will be one bolt here to the manifold, another bolt down there that you'll take off from the bottom, and then the transmission dipstick tube, the upper half will come off. It just slips into that lower piece. There's a little O-ring there. So set that to the side with your two bolts so you don't confuse them with other stuff. Come up to the manifold. There's a nut here, a bolt down here in between these two, the number 1 and 2 runners, another bolt in the middle, another bolt down between the 2 runners between 3 and 4, another nut back there in the corner. Then underneath, and you won't be able to see them, between the number 1 and 2 runners, straight in at the bottom is one bolt there, and then another one between the number 3 and 4 runners straight back. I put together some extensions and a socket. These are all 12mm, by the way. The transmission tube and the manifold are all 12mm. This setup is 9.5 inches end to end. It was about ideal. You could go longer and be okay. My extension assembly ended up being right about here. You've got another 3, maybe 4 inches, so you can play with that, get a wrench on there, break it loose, and then spin them out. The bolts for the manifold were stuck pretty tight. The moment they break loose, then they spin out pretty easily. To avoid dropping the nuts or bolts, the top bolts are pretty easy. This nut is pretty easy to keep track of. The back nut, not so easy. It's down there, it's hard to get your hand on it. You can put like a little piece of tape or a piece of paper inside of your socket, and that'll help keep the bolt or nut attached to your socket so you can pull it out, then pull the nut off or bolt so you don't drop it and lose it somewhere down there. One of these, this front one on the bottom, not too hard to get to. The rear one's a little bit tougher, but not terrible. But that rear one's really hard to hold onto because you can't really get your hand in there very well. And that's where you really want to make sure it stays attached to your socket so when you pull it out it doesn't drop. So at that point you'll have your manifold basically loose. This is the new coolant bypass pipe. It's metal. The original was plastic. You got two 12mm nuts, one on top, one on bottom. At the back of this pipe, and I'll show you here using the old one. So there's your two in the front. This pipe goes under the manifold, ends up right above the starter in the back. There will be one bolt coming from the rear forward right at the transmission bell housing. So you'll take that one bolt off. As you can see, the small nipple on this one broke, probably a pretty common thing. So you'll have the two hoses, a skinny one there on top, the bigger fat one, it's one of the heater hoses, I believe. You disconnect those two and then rotate this pipe to where that's facing kind of in a downward, and then you can snake it out from under the manifold. Oh, I'm sorry. Once you've got the manifold unbolted, you pull it back. The front will pull back very easily, and you can pull it back past the stud, no problem. In the very back of the manifold is a vacuum line that's pretty hard to get to disconnect. I was able to leave it connected. I pulled the manifold back from the rear of it, pulled it back, and then right where this upper nut is, I slipped the fat end of a 3/8 extension, slipped that down between the manifold and the cylinder head. That keeps the manifold pulled back, otherwise it springs forward again and it's not going to let you get the pipe out. So you pull the manifold back, slip that extension or any other tool or anything you've got, just slip it in there so it keeps the manifold pulled back. At the front, you'll pull the manifold back, let it drop off of that stud, and it'll just sit there. At that point, you've got enough room to slide that pipe out, slide your new pipe in. Before you put your pipe onto the studs here, come on, focus. Well, it's not going to focus. So before you get your pipe slipped onto the studs, make sure you put your gasket on first. The replacement gasket for the metal pipe is a thin metal gasket with like a coating on it. Slip that on over the studs, it'll stay there. Then you push your pipe into place. Make sure, you'll have to do this from underneath, so you'll push it up, slip it onto the studs. On the back side, you'll slip this section of the pipe in front of the I believe it's the plate. Yeah, it's a metal plate between the transmission and the engine. So just slip that into place, kind of line it up to the hole. Doesn't have to be exact, but just get it into place. Then you can come up top, tighten your two nuts where it connects to the back of the thermostat housing. Go back underneath, install the one bolt holding it to the transmission plate there. And then it's just put everything back on, reconnect everything. It's a whole lot less BS than taking the manifold completely out of the vehicle. To pull it out, you have to disconnect a lot more hoses, electrical stuff, that really difficult vacuum line in the back. I think it's part of the crankcase vent, I'm not really sure. But yeah, there's some kind of a hose back there it didn't look like it was going to be any fun. You would have to disconnect your fuel lines and all this stuff that you have to disconnect to remove the manifold. That can all just stay on there. Pull the manifold back a little bit, pull your pipe out, throw it back in, and you'll be back in business. Hope it helps.